Hello again, everyone. This is a very old video that I found in an old hard drive about me painting a hand-painted texture on a 3D model. The 3D model is in 3D Studio Max, and it has a 75% self-brightness material. So it's self-illuminated, but not completely. And the idea is I wanted just to position that with the hand-painted texture and shading that I'm putting here on the texture. The way that I set up the texture is pretty much common. Is that I create a UVW map, and then that gives me a cluster of areas from the model that I then separate into separate layers so that I can shade each layer separately. And basically what I'm doing right now is I'm dividing the areas of the model into shades so that when a certain face has a certain shading, it means it's facing or not the light source. So it's a very basic way of approaching shading. So the idea is to start very simple, get a broad stroke. I mean, it's very methodical way of doing it, but it guarantees good results every time if you really follow on doing this properly. So the model is slightly darker than the texture, and this is because of the color management in 3D Studio Max, which is a little bit different. And this is something that was eating my brain for a long time until I figured out how to turn that off, basically. So in here, I'm using hand-painted sketches because this part of the model requires a little more attention, being that it's a face. But the idea is that you get rid of the lines eventually. Okay, so it's pretty much like what Blizzard does with their hand-painted style, is that you never see the drawing, because that tends to be a cartoon look, but a little more kid style, like it's meant for a younger audience. While what Blizzard does, they create this hand-painted style, which kind of looks like fine arts in a way, and the theme is fantasy, but they still pull it off in a way that you look at that and say, okay, this is cartoon, this is stylized, but it's not childish. So you want to keep lines away from your texture as to avoid that. So basically the idea is that you get these shades in before you start adding any detail. Now the face, obviously, I sort of skipped that. I went for the face with a little more detail because I'm just really into drawing faces. And as you can see, everything before was in this mid-tone range, so sort of a 75% gray to a 25% gray in terms of lightness. But the idea is that now I add a bit more of a bright shade to do the edges, to do the worn edges of the rock. And that increases my range of colors. And the point is, as you can see, the top stair already has a little bit of bounce light, and you'll see that on the model. And eventually, you can see it there, and eventually I copy that. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm adding a little bit of bounce light on the bottom steps, because the way that the step top is shaded is really bright, so you should see some light bouncing back up onto the other stairs. Now, creating these lines here is a matter of deciding whether or not you want the details to be very big. Shading the stone itself is quite easy because you can use broad strokes, because the volume of a stone is pretty much within that sort of range, is that they're big wide surfaces, and when they break, they become a different shade because they're a different surface altogether, and they're fairly flat. So it's a multiple-faced object in just one surface. So it's easy to get a brush stroke to look like a surface of the rock. Also in this case, I'm going to start adding some lines here, but I pretty much want to figure out the shading. Again, you want to make sure that you don't put in a lot of detail before you got the shading right, because then you're going to be painting over it and you're going to be ruining some of the work that you did. And in this case, you can't see how often I increase or shrink the size of the brush. And you also can't see how often I color pick because the video is sped up quite a lot. This took about an hour to do, and you're seeing this in 6 minutes or 7 minutes, I think. So adding these black lines really creates a cut on the stone. Okay, so you want to be very careful as to whether or not you want this line to be really, really black. Now these are stones that are completely separate and they're put together. But if this was just like a dent on the stone, I'd probably not go with black, exactly black on there. Adding this line there creates a small cast shadow. But again, that has to be within the range of the model. If you do a cast shadow in a surface that is not facing away from the light, then you're going to get some trouble, because it's going to look like a graphic and not like shading. The white edge effect to create the worn effect is basically taking advantage of what has caused the stone to actually be worn. And it's because it's an edge that is exposed to either collision or people rubbing against it. So those edges, not only do they break, they also become smoother and more polished. So they reflect more light. So that's kind of the justification for you to be able to do that. In this case, what I did was quite lazy. I just did the lines, the dark lines, and then I took the bright shade, went around the edges, and then I took the mid-tone inside the stone and draw over some of the edges to really not exaggerate it. Then I took the tone from the shading and glazed over it to smooth those details out as they were becoming quite exaggerated. And then went back to with a dark shade and just added shades in the intersections that I felt were a little more intense, where you could really see that. The whole part here, the whole idea here of the edge is to just brighten up and accentuate the silhouette. So if you have a silhouette that you really want to show off, you want to go in and add a bright edge somewhere to exaggerate that, to accentuate the fact that that's an edge that you want people to realize. In this case, I'm doing this shading in a different layer initially because I wasn't sure I was going to like it. And honestly, looking at it now, I'm not sure if I'm going to leave that the way it is. So I might change it. And this bright edge is kind of looking out of theme because it's a little too bright, being that it's facing down. But again, it's been such a long time, I don't remember the motives for me to be doing some of the stuff that I'm doing here. This cast shadow, that's fine. Oh, I think it's I think those edges actually exist on the model. I usually do those kind of scribbles on the texture to figure out what surface this or that is. This is the only element that's going to get color straight away. Now, a lot of people don't like using the dodge and burn tool. I quite like doing it to get specific tones. And when I'm doing it, I'm playing around with light and how that would actually light the altar. And as you can see, just by doing that, I get this really nice sense of energy and light going on to the model. So it's pretty much an idea of checking what lines are facing towards the model, what sort of polygons are facing the model, and getting those to work. Overall, I think I add blue in all the surfaces that are kind of facing the model, and then in the end, I do an adjustment layer. I feel to also change the tone of, there we go, to change the tone of the stone to something a little more interesting rather than just gray. And this is what I end up with. And I hope you guys enjoy that. Take care.